Hello and welcome to the Recruit Rockstars podcast, where we focus on the people part of your business. Every Tuesday and Thursday, I interview a world-class expert on talent and recruiting so that you can build a company filled with rock stars. And ladies and gentlemen, I've done it for you today. I've bagged the elephant. This is a guy who's been at this business for over 20 years. He has forgotten more than I will ever know about recruiting, attracting talent, retaining talent. Finally packaged it in a book, which you got to get your hands on, not only for the title. I mean, the title's great, but for the content of it. Steve wrote the book called Recruiting Sucks, which I think is arguably the best business book title I've seen in years. He's also the CEO of Qualigence, which is based in Michigan, has been at this again for over 20 years, helps all kinds of companies, big companies, growth companies, early stage companies. We'll talk a bit about that, recruiting, finding candidates, et cetera. And what we're going to talk about the next 20 minutes is something that Steve is very passionate about, which is how do you connect the purpose of the business with creating purpose for your people? Easier said than done. And so we're going to talk about that too. So with all that said, Steve, welcome to the show. It's great to have you.
Jeff, it's great to be on. Thank you for inviting me on.
I'm super excited. I don't even know where to start. I have so many questions for you. So why don't we start at the top, right? Let's start at the 50,000 foot level. Recruiting Sucks is the name of the book. Great book. Why does it suck? Why is this stuff so hard? Or is it not that hard and people just make it hard?
Well, let me give you the whole title, though. It's Recruiting Sucks, ... but it doesn't have to.
Okay, that's an important clarification.
It's important because I'm not gonna bash the industry that,
of course,
that I've been fortunate to.
You don't mean recruiters suck. You mean the process of recruiting is really hard. Right.
I think we get caught up in this. Like, I've been doing this for 27 years, right? A long time.
Wow.
And I've made all the mistakes that a recruiter can make, a search guy can make, a sourcing person can make. And what I tried to do in the book.
Steve, we've lost your connection.
Sucked into.
Steve?
And why things. Oh, I'm there.
I'm going to pause you.
Okay.
So
what happened?
Opening, and then for some reason you just froze. So, and I have a great network. You have a good network connection?
I have a fiber line coming into the office.
So we'll start it again. Not from the very beginning, because we got.
You'll splice it.
Where you cut off was, and the reason, and then it froze.
Oh, the reason I wrote the book. We'll start there. Okay. So, Jeff, and the reason I wrote the book is that I wanted to look at the 5 to 7 myths that I think that all of us as recruiting consultants have succumbed to over the years, and ultimately creates this perspective from CEOs of recruiting sucks. That doesn't have to.
Let's use one. Just throw out one that you think most listeners would identify with.
Yeah, I think from a recruiting perspective, from an interviewing, that skills are the most important thing. This is a topic that we always talk about. Is it skills or is it attitude? Behavioral-based interviewing, or this style of interviewing, or whatever the case is. I walk people through in the book a little bit different perspective of, first, I think it's about results. If you're growing your business, whether you're early stage or late stage startup, you need people that can actually produce results. So let's focus there first. Do you really care if they have a degree? Do you really care if they have 10 years versus 8 years? Does that matter? And I walk people through a practical approach to interviewing candidates for the right reasons about the right things. Skills are important, but they're not the first thing, and they're only one piece of what I call 7.
I guess skills feel safe and feel easier to grab onto. Well, he's been doing Java developing for 3 years, so therefore he should be successful at this role.
Yeah, but let's look at why people get fired, right? As a CEO, I'm a CEO myself. I've got a staff, all these people, right, that build their staffs. We generally don't lose people for skill, right? We hired them based on skill, and we're really good at that, Jeff, really good at it. But what we end up firing them for is they couldn't do it the way we wanted them to. They didn't believe in the purpose of our business because maybe we didn't communicate it to them. So when I walk them through what I call the core 4, we look at all of those pieces, skills included, but we weight them the way they should be weighted based upon why we get rid of people or why people leave our organization in the first place.
You've been studying this for 20, 30 years, 20, 25 years. Yeah. You've parted ways with employees, I'm sure we all have, and your clients have. What are, if if we don't part ways with with employees for skills, what are the big reasons that we part ways with employees? And have you taken an informal data?
Oh yeah, we've measured this time and time and time again. Now they're not scientific, so let's be careful about that.
But what have you seen?
But one of the number one reasons is they're not motivated to do the job. You hear this constantly.
Were they motivated and they lost the motivation, or they were never motivated?
Well, this is the question, right? Did you hire somebody who wasn't motivated, or did you kill them when you hired them?
Yeah, right.
Let's think about this, because here's the reality that I uncovered 15 years ago. This truth kind of came to my mind. Everybody's motivated. Everybody. It's just that, what are they motivated?
You got to tap into it. Yeah.
Well, but let's go take it a step further. You walk into your sales meeting, you're the CEO, you've got your sales team there, and you got one person that's sitting there texting on their phone. Right. And you think they're never motivated because they don't pay attention. Well, they're motivated, but they're motivated in their phone at that particular point.
Right.
So it's not about, do you motivate them or not? It's about, can you actually shift their motivation, which is an entirely different game.
Can that be done, or would you argue that that's a hiring issue and you hired the wrong person?
Well, you can influence. You can't change the makeup, the DNA of an individual. And part of the core 4 interviewing process is to understand, what are the drives that create certain behaviors that you see as motivation or non-motivation, as one example, right? You can't just look at somebody's behavior and say they're this or they're that. You've got to understand what's creating the behavior. We don't spend the time in an interview process to do that.
Got it. And most people are never trained on how to interview anyway.
No. Right. No, we do it because this is the way it was done to us. So we ask the basic questions, and then we start asking crazy questions like, would you prefer a green or a purple turtle?
Right.
What?
So rather than turn this into a whole interview lesson, which we're not going to, because we're going to talk about purpose in a second, what would you say is the one actionable change that people can make in their interviewing that you think would make a big difference? Something that they can get their arms around and they just shift their thinking, they would be a better, more accurate interviewer.
Number one, change the steps that you're going to use to interview and what you're looking for. And I'll give you the 4 really quickly.
These are the core 4?
This is part of the core 4. Okay. So number 1 is production. Have they done the job elsewhere in a similar situation with the same challenges? What was the result? How'd they get the result? If it's not similar and they can't figure out how to do it, then they're probably not going to figure out how to do it now.
Or you're taking an unusually high risk.
That is correct. Right. And sometimes that's okay. But let's look at that first and look at production. Yeah. The second thing is purpose. What drives that particular individual? And I'm not talking about wealth and fame. Yeah. I'm talking about, is this somebody that goes to their son or daughter's baseball game every Friday, and that's important to them, and now you put them in a position where that's not available? Purpose doesn't align at this point. Yeah. That's number 2. Yeah. Number 3 is going to be profile. That's where you look at the skills, the competencies, and all the other stuff.
That's where everyone goes first.
Yes. Now it's number 3. And then number 4 is what I call probe, and it's asking the questions. Why? Stick with the facts. What's important to you? Why is that important to you? And how are we going to be able to address it? If you can answer those 3 questions as part of the steps in the core 4, you can start applying that tomorrow with the next person that you interview.
You're talking about a very different interview approach than I think most people are used to, which is they try to get right into the tangible meat. And you're talking at a pretty psychological level.
Sure. Well, right? Let's look at the numbers. 11% of the time we fire for skill. We just talked about it, Jeff, right? 89% of the time we fire for something else. It's either a purpose alignment or it's a behavior alignment or some combination of those. Why the hell aren't we starting there in the first place?
Yeah. So let's talk about that, because I teed that up as really our topic. So purpose. So look, we need to, as the leader of the business or the department, the function, the team, we need to find an overlap in the purpose of the team or the company with the purpose of the person. Like you said, if you can find that overlap, it's magic, right?
That's right.
How do I do that? How do I translate the purpose of my business, which is not just making money, to the purpose of the person?
Well, let's talk about the life cycle of purpose in a business first, because as anybody who's gone through a startup or a growth organization, you're going to experience this. So let's talk about what we do. Yeah. When I started this business 20 years ago, I had a purpose, not of making money, but of changing the industry, right? So
I had the recruiting industry?
Yeah, I wanted to change the way we did recruiting. I thought it wasn't done right. I wanted to impact the industry itself. So purpose was more than just me It was how do I impact other people?
It was
So
a
that's how
higher
we start.
purpose. I don't mean that in a religious way, but in a
Correct.
the calling. Yeah.
That is correct. But it's how I impact others. Then once we have our purpose, I purposely focused on changing the industry. I had to go out and as leaders, you all do this. You had to go out and convince people to buy into your purpose, right? I want to change the industry. I can't pay a ton of money right now, but I want the right people to support that purpose. Make sense?
Yep.
Okay. Now, as you start to grow, you've got to create some process within your organization to support the people to drive your purpose. Make sense?
Yep.
Now you've got to measure performance, make sure you have the right process that supports the people driving that purpose. And what comes last? What's the last piece to this? Profit.
That's an output, not an input.
That profits come as a result,
yeah.
right, of the right performance, because you have the right processes and the right people that are focused on the vision or the purpose of the business. That's how we start most of our businesses.
Yeah.
What happens over time, Jeff?
It all just gets fucked up.
Well, let's think about the model. We reverse the model.
Yeah.
Right?
Profit, well, especially when you raise outside capital.
Huge.
When you go public.
Yes.
The profit and the investor take priority over the people. And I should have asked, just so the listener understands, is Qualigence completely self-funded, or do you have outside investors that have that kind of pressure on the business?
So Qualigence itself is 100% self-funded.
Which really helps.
It does. Some of the other businesses that I am either involved with as an investor or have outside dollars in both in and outside of the industry, I've got that pressure from the outside as well. So I've seen it from both sides.
Got it.
But I've seen it work on both sides, because what we do as entrepreneurs, as business leaders, and especially when we bring in outside dollars, is we begin to flip the model, like you mentioned, Jeff, right? Sure. We start focusing on profits, our performance, and it's important. You got to have performance metrics tied to profits, but everything, right, changes, and it's all about profits. So now purpose is in our rear view mirror, profits is in our front mirror, our front windshield. That can't happen. Then companies go through this realignment and say, okay, we're going to go back to living our purpose in the first place. Well, you should have never forgotten about it. And profits come as a result of purpose, not the opposite.
So the skeptical listener is saying, oh, that sounds good, Steve.
Yeah.
I'm missing the numbers by 10%. My investors are beating me up. I'm at risk of getting fired as the VP of marketing or the CEO or head of sales. It all sounds great when things are going well.
Sure.
So can you make it actionable in a way that that the listener can understand and say, here's what I've gotten wrong and here's how I need to refocus on my employees' purpose?
Well, and you bring up a good point, right? When things are not going well, what do we have a tendency to do? We're cutting costs, we're cutting corners, we're doing all those things. It's an even more difficult place to work because everybody senses it and feels the pressure. Am I right?
Yeah.
Okay. Go back to
Glassdoor reviews. They get nervous. They start looking for a job because they got a mortgage to pay.
And they got families to take care of, and they got mouths to feed and college to pay for and everything else. It's all warranted. But what happened when you started the business in the first place and you talked about the purpose of the business and you got people to join you for less money for the vision that you had? Right. People came in at really tough times. So you've got to change your vernacular as the leader and not talk. We just got to keep cutting. We got to keep cutting. We got to keep cutting. And you've got to balance the financial with the purpose of the business. But people will run at the first sign of any type of issue, right, where you start coming down on them if they don't believe that you're still focused on the purpose that you started the business with in the first place.
So it may sound obvious, but over-communicating.
Yeah.
Why we're making these changes, how we're making these changes, that you understand the impact on your people of these changes. There's a lot of leaders will hunker down and communicate less. That's the time we need to communicate more.
Think about 2008 and 9.
Yeah, right.
Worst time in our economic history that since you and I have been alive for the most part, right?
Yeah.
And the companies that really struggled and ultimately failed during that time. Now there's some financial wins that they couldn't change the wins. I get it. I completely get it. But what happened is we got hit during that time. I don't know if you did, but we
all recruiting did. Yeah, sure.
So what we were able to do is say, look, we got in this business to change the industry. In order to change the industry, we got to have you as people. I can't keep paying you what I was paying you. So here's what what our choices are. We can fulfill our purpose. I can pay you less. You can stick around. And when we come out on the other end of this, I'll make it up to you. what other leaders unfortunately ended up doing was cut. We're stopping everything. People left.
Yeah.
And then they wanted them back. And guess what? They wouldn't come back.
And how did your team, without getting too personal, how did your team respond to that strategy of there's still a home for you here, but your comp is going to go down?
So we had 3 people leave out of the entire group.
Out of what? Out of how many?
55, 60 at the time.
Okay.
We had
Like
2 return.
or 5%. Yeah.
Yeah. We had 2 return. 1 got a job somewhere else.
Got it.
Everybody else stayed through the heartache and for the most part are still here today.
Got it.
It sounds like touchy-feely stuff, Jeff. It's not. It's the model of business that actually works, that keeps your people aligned, who are aligned with the purpose of the company. If they came in just for a check, they're gone. You can't do anything about it.
So speaking of which, when you make a hire of someone who does not share your purpose, they've gotten through the interview process, they snuck in, right? It was just a bad hire.
Happens.
How long do you give it? How long does it take to realize it? How do you gently exit them? Walk us through what you've learned as the best practice to do that.
Yeah, my experience, both myself and with my clients, and some of these are, small startups and some of these are Fortune 500. So it spans the gamut, is you generally know by the second week.
Second week.
Oh yeah. You don't admit it, but you generally know in your heart of hearts, and you see their interaction with you and your teams and so forth, that you really mishired this individual.
We've all felt that. And by the second week, it's clearly not performance. You don't have any expectations yet. It's a fit issue.
Yeah.
Then how long should you give it before you take action? I don't mean how long do people give it, because they wait 6 months or 12 months. How long should you give it?
So if I know I'll give you an example. If I hired somebody like this about 2 years ago, and keep in mind, I've done this a long time.
Yeah. No one's perfect.
A freaking mistake, right?
Yeah.
So I hired somebody actually to run one of my recruiting teams as the VP of recruiting. I knew within 2 weeks, easy, that this guy was not great guy, technically savvy, everything, but he didn't tie into he was misaligned with what we were trying to do as a business. I knew it within 2 weeks. I should have made the cut right then, for his sake and for my sake and for the team's sake, because it started to bleed over to rest of the team. And the team started thinking, are we really living our purpose? Are we doing what we say we're going to do when we've got somebody here who's obviously not doing it?
In other words, if you're willing to look the other way, then you're full of shit on purpose.
Yeah. So it took me about 45 days. Had I done it in the first 15 days, I would have been following through on what I was saying. I caused consternation internally because I didn't do it fast enough. And I've seen that happen time and time and time again, because they're not willing to explain why.
Is there anything you could have done differently that you missed, or would you say, look, no one's going to be no one's going to be perfect on this thing?
So I do think there's some more things that I could have done, but it would have ended up in the same exact result. Because when he and I stayed in contact, by the way, in this particular situation, right? His drivers are not anywhere near my drivers or the drivers of the business. He now has come full circle and said, you're right. We're not aligned. We love each other, but we're not aligned.
Yeah. It's like an irreconcilable difference that leads to divorce. Sure. Neither person is bad. They're just different. And he'll probably go on to a great career somewhere else that's a better home for him.
Yeah. I mean, here's the one thing, though, and we talked about this beforehand, Jeff, is that people need to understand what their own purpose is, right? The business needs to be clear. We're in business to do what beyond money? You opened up and talked about that, right? What did we try to? We're trying to change the industry. We're trying to serve this population. We're trying to do this. You could look at everybody's purpose, like Southwest Air, to some of these others that have really done this pretty damn well, right? And they've communicated it really well. But then in the interview process or in your association with your employees, you got to understand what's driving them. What's driving them to do what they do, and do those two align? If they do not align and they cannot be influenced, Jeff, no matter what you do now or 3 weeks from now, it's done. It's done, and you're dragging it along, and it's causing problems with them, with you, and your team.
Yeah, and that will force out your other best people, which then you are just left with your B and C players, and you got a big problem.
Happens all the time. I see it. I see it daily.
In the couple minutes remaining, what's another tangible problem or issue with regard to this purpose question? So not communicating, not interviewing and assessing for purpose as much as skills. Give us one more tangible thing that I can do as a leader around this purpose question.
Define it. If you can't define it, Jeff, you can't communicate it.
What does that look like? How do I do that?
So
let's use you as an example.
Let's be
I
very
want to redefine the recruiting industry.
So yeah, but now you got to take it in steps. What does that mean? Okay, I want to change the recruiting industry. One of the problems that I saw in the recruiting industry, because I was on the receiving side, is that I don't mean to bash my brothers and sisters in the recruiting industry.
Yeah.
Let's get this straight, right?
Yeah.
But the model of either contingent or retain, where it's based on a commission, I think can drive the wrong behavior, and it did when I was receiving services.
Sure.
So we changed our model completely.
What is your model, just so people understand?
So our model is retained like a lawyer. You're paying us by the hour.
Hourly. Okay, got
services
it. Yep.
Versus anything else.
Yep.
Okay?
As much or as little as I want, you'll take it as far as I want.
Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter at all. So let's have a different relationship. Let's change the entire dynamic between client and vendor, now partner, right? Everything. My relationship with the candidates are different and so forth. So I could actually say, I want to change the industry by doing these three things that affect the industry. I want to change the financial model. I want to change the financial model, an incentive for the recruiters themselves. And I want to focus all on quality and measure quality, meaning performance of the candidate after they've been placed. Something unheard of in our industry.
You really took redefine the industry and you translated it into very specific, measurable things.
Yeah, they got to be, think about it in terms of KPIs. What are the KPIs that we can measure to say, are we transforming the industry? Yeah. If you talk really big, I want to change the airline industry. What the hell does that mean, and how do you measure it?
Is it the service? Is it the price? And how are you going to do that?
Sure.
And right.
And Jeff, it's one of the first questions I ask CEOs when they ask us to come in and help them. It's, what are you trying to do? Oh, we're trying to grow. Okay, put that out of here. Tell me what you're trying to do. Oh, I want to change the semiconductor industry. Yeah. Okay, define that for me. And they think about it and they can't answer it. Or they try to beat around the bush because nobody's questioned them on, what do you mean by that? Right. How do you measure it if you're able to do it? Otherwise, it means nothing.
And how do you possibly interview and assess candidates against that if you're not able to articulate it?
Oh my gosh, you can't. Right. You can't, because if you don't know what your specific deliverables are, you don't know how their role fits into that actual deliverable. There is such a connection here. There's a very, very thick, not just a thread, but a rope tying these together. And that's more going back to aligning the purpose of the company and the purpose of the person.
One last question before we start to wrap up, which is compensation. How does that factor in? So I'm guessing you'll say it's not the number one thing. People will come and stay for mission and purpose and passion even more than money, but it has to be enough money. Yeah. So how do you find that balance? Have you figured out where you want to be from a comp perspective? Like, do you want to be 50th percentile, 90th percent? Like, how do you think about that?
I don't go down to the percentiles because every company is a little bit different. Here's how I look at it. I think money is a big issue, a huge issue. And right now, surveys, people are saying money is actually number one. But here's what we've got to define is go under the covers. Why is money number one? The common thread here is because you're not paying me enough to put up with the shit that I got to put up with.
Yeah, right. If it was a great place to work, it would not be an issue.
That's right. So in that particular instance, it's not that they wanted more money, but they wanted more money to put up with the crap. So if you took care of the crap, you didn't have to pay them, to be in the top 2% of compensation. So I look at it very differently. Why are they running from comp?
Yeah.
Is it truly a financial need, or are they running from something you're not paying them enough to actually do that? So, I'm not the highest payer here. My team makes less here than if they went somewhere else.
Let's be clear for the listener. When you say here, where you're near Detroit?
Yeah, in Detroit. I'm outside of Detroit.
You don't pay top of market.
No.
I'm sure you benchmark. Do you have a philosophy? Do you try to be above average? Where do you try to be?
No, we're actually a little bit below average for what we pay recruiters.
So it's a great place to work. You'll find a home, very low turnover. And in conjunction with that, the comp is going to be okay, but you could probably make more elsewhere.
Yeah, and we're very open about that. Yeah. Now, our sales team's a little bit different because they are commissioned, but our recruiting team, you can go elsewhere, but it's a different way of life. It's for a different reason. The opportunities for development here. Our purpose for our business, Jeff, is people living their purpose.
Yeah.
That is our mission statement.
Yeah.
And we do it internally and we do it in our model externally. So we live it on both sides. I make mistakes in it every day, but it works.
Recruiting sucks, but it doesn't have to. Where can people get the book, and how can people learn more about Qualigence?
You can buy the book on Amazon. Just look up Recruiting Sucks. It's the first one that came up. If you need to buy in bulk, which we've had a lot of them, reach out to me at steve@qualigence.com. at stevelowisz.com. And you can also check out more about Qualigence at Qualigence, QUALIGENCE.com.
I appreciate your candor. I appreciate your insights. And I encourage listeners to get their hands on this book because it really doesn't have to, right? You can't go about this the same way you've been doing it when it's the lowest, tightest job market in 50 years.
That's right.
Thanks, Steve.
Thanks so much, Jeff.